Dober večer vsem. Ja, dober večer vsem. Buonasera a tutti. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all tonight on behalf of Mladinska knjiga, the Slovene publisher of Paolo Giordano's novels. Caro Paolo, buonasera anche a lei. Solo un paio di parole in italiano and now I'll switch back to English.
Buonasera Breda, buonasera a tutti. Grazie per l'invito. Thanks for the invitation.
Grazie anche a te Paolo e grazie anche a lei. Sto combinando adesso. So now indeed I'll switch back to English. I would like to welcome you really on behalf of your Slovene publisher for being tonight with us. In rada bi se tudi zahvalila vsem, ki naju danes poslušate in gledate. I'll just say a few more words in Slovene just to tell the titles of your other translated novels into Slovene and then I'll switch back to English. Giordana, Paolo. Torej za začetek naj samo še to povem, da nam je res v čas, da je z nami danes avtor, ki je sicer precej zaseden. In pri Mladinski knjigi, ki je nekako njegov slovenski založnik, vemo, da so doslej izšli že romani, ki so bili izredno dobro brani, večinoma so tudi razprodani. To pa so naslovi Samotnost praštevil, Človeško telo, Srebro in črnina in v času epidemije tudi kratka knjižica V času epidemije. Danes pa predstavljamo njegov najnovejši roman Raztrgajmo nebo. So I introduced all your titles that have been translated into Slovene, and I'd just like to say a few more words on your recent novel, your recent translation into Slovene, and then I suggest we start the conversation. So the English title of your recent novel is Heaven and Earth. Divoriamo in cielo, mentre in our language the title reads Raztrgajmo nebo. And while I'm saying this, I would also like to give a special welcome to your Slovene translator, Anita Jadrić, who is also with us tonight. So Anita,
That makes me happy.
Lepo pozdravljeni, Anita, kjerkoli že ste, verjamem, da ste sedaj z nami. And it's a really nice and really great translation as all her previous translations of your works. Heaven and Earth is basically a love story and a story about nature, religion, and growing up. It's a story of Teresa from industrial Torino, and Teresa spends her summers at her grandmother's in Apulia, where she falls in love with a boy of her age, Bern. The grandmother's neighbors are an unusual family, we could say, a couple who raises not only their son Nicola, but also the father's nephew Bern and a foster son, Tommaso. They live isolated, and the rest of the world, we could say, regards them as a sect. And years later, the three boys establish their version of commune on the very same farm. So this is the skeleton of the novel. We will present this novel in our conversation. At the end of our conversation, we will also talk about your essay, about the pandemic, and then I will invite our listeners to join in. Actually, I'm inviting you already now. You please do write your questions in the section questions and answers, and approximately after half an hour we will choose a few of them and we will ask the author to answer them. So Paolo, I would start with your video address to your Slovene readers, in which you offered one of the keys of how your latest novel could be read. And you said that it is the nature that is in the center of this book and our relation to it and to science. And that the current situation, the current situation which has been going on for a year now in a way, offers almost a better possibility of reading this novel than when you actually wrote it. So could you say a few more words about that?
Yeah. First of all, let me thank you and thank my translator, who I'm not seeing her, but I know she's there. And I mean, they always have half of the credit when a book comes out abroad, and I wish I had more chances to uh, meet all my translators in person, because they're you know they're very, very uh, weird relationships, the one with translators, because uh, they are people who actually know you very, very intimately, because they uh, get to know all the ideas and the intentions hidden behind the sentences, sometimes even more than you actually know yourself. But you know so very little about them. So it's very asymmetrical relationship, and I always feel like I'm in debt because of this. So I just wanted to acknowledge her for the work, for this other work. And yeah, as you said, that there is nature in the center of heaven and earth, um, and it came from basically from love, because I fell in love some 15 years ago with the landscape of Puglia, in this region in the south of Italy, which looks so different from the place I grew up in the north. I grew up in a very, let's say, foggy place without wind, with not much light, close to the mountains, uh, more similar to Slovenia in a way, um, but in the flatlands. And at some point, when I was about 20, I went to Puglia for a conference in physics, actually, at that time, a summer school in particle physics. And I completely fell in love with the landscape, which is so different, with the light, with the olive trees. And years, so I bought a house there when I could, and I started to spend all my summers there, uh, a few months every year. So I got to know the place and the people, and I really fell in love with everything there. And so at some point, I felt I was ready to write a whole novel about that place. But the very interesting fact is that, this is a book that I wrote, of course, before the pandemic started, but somehow I feel that it's even more understandable now that we've lived a year in the pandemic, because at the center of the book, there is an epidemic, actually. There is this illness that affects the trees, the olive trees that I fell in love with, and that in the last 10 years is slowly killing all the olive trees in that region, changing the landscape totally, making it into some kind of desert. And there's been a lot of controversy about this within the population. So on the one side, there was science telling people this bacterium, it's a bacterium, not a virus in the case of the trees, is very serious. So we have to act immediately and make a lockdown of the infected trees, and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, uh, a big part of the population was not willing to cut down the trees, of course, or to change their habits, which are so ancient, and so on and so forth. And so this is at the center of the book, because the main character, the protagonists of the book, eventually become environmentalists, and they fight to protect the trees, the olive trees, from this illness in their own idea, and they fight against science, actually. Um, and and then the pandemic, the human pandemic, happened, and somehow I was in a very twisted way, prepared to what would happen because I had written that book, that particular novel about trees and about all the things that happens between science and people, and science that is not understood by people, and that forces us into things that are against our will, and so on and so forth. So I know I'm maybe made this very complicated, but this is actually a very important point about the novel, especially now.
You mentioned several things. I'll try to reply just to the most important ones before we continue. But on behalf of your translator, I would like to thank you for your very kind words, because I think that they meant a lot to your translator. And secondly, whatever you mentioned in relation to pandemic, we will return to towards the end of our conversation. But I'd just like to say that I was amazed when you read your text, How Contagion Works, which you wrote at the very beginning on the 2nd of March, I think you started writing, and how you incredibly accurately, not guessed, you wrote, you saw how things will develop, and they indeed developed that way, but we will return to that. I would go back now to the novel Heaven and Earth, and as you mentioned this commune, you mentioned this environmentalist struggle and so on. There are in a way two parallels, you could say. At this farm in Apulia, there are two communes. The first one could be considered religious, the second one, as you mentioned, environmentalist. In some ways they work, they are different as the rest of the world, but in some ways they fail and they do not work. Why, would you say?
It is a book about utopia, in a way, about the idea of making the world better with the best intentions. So the founder of this religious community in Puglia in the book is a man called Cesare. He is the father of one of the boys and the adoptive and the stepfather of the other ones. And he's really into religion. And somehow all his life is devoted to saving other people and making and creating a place of perfect harmony. We know many experiments like this happened in the past and still happen in the present. It's probably part of many youths to try and be able to make a perfect place in opposition to the outside world, which is so corrupted and difficult and unjust and so on and so forth. But we also know from experience that most of these experiments turn out to be failures in the end, or at least they don't really survive when they clash with the impact of human desires, because human desires are not perfect. They're not perfectly they cannot match perfectly everyone's desire. When you put people together, you cannot expect them to have all the same line and all the same ideals, the same desires. And that's exactly what happens in Cesare's community. Somehow the boys' dreams are different as they grow up because their souls are different. And what I wanted to explore is how it is possible in life to start from a very good intention, like the one that Cesare has, and the one that the boys will have later in their lives. And from that good intention, you can get to a point in which you are making something that is very bad, that is very dangerous, that is not fair at all. And that's somehow the arch that the book is following. How you can start from the good and end up in the bad without really with a sort of continuity. I think that's very mysterious in human life. It also happens in families somehow, no? Sometimes it happens in family. I mean, or in close relationships that we have. We don't mean anything bad towards the other people. We try to do everything for the common good or for the other people's good, but then things somehow end up being very wrong, and families collapse, and relationships collapse, and community, like the one that is in the book, which is somehow an enlarged family, collapses too.
It seems to me as if this, let's say, paradoxical dynamics is captured by the English phrase that the road to hell is paved with good
With good
intentions.
intentions. Yes, that's true.
You mentioned the three boys, Nicola, Tommaso, and Bern, and their bond is extremely strong indeed. What would you say, what binds them together, and why they cannot really separate?
I think it's something that can happen when you grow up in a very isolated place, like they do. Um, they and on the other hand, I think it's something that happens when to people who have a very, I don't know how to call it in English, but a very significant childhood somehow. Some of us have very significant childhoods, so intense and so full of bright experiences and uh, strong bonds with other people, friends or sisters and brothers, and with the nature itself, which plays a role also in this. Those childhoods are so significant that somehow everything that comes afterward is a little less. It can only be a little less in comparison to that. It also happens with to some people with their first loves, and that's what happened to the protagonist Teresa. Her first love with one of the boys from the farm is so intense and overwhelming that somehow nothing that she meets afterward seems to compare with it. And it's a sort of prison, no, that you build, like a golden prison built out of memories, of your early memories. And I think there are many people, I've been one of those, who are somehow confined in those golden prisons without even knowing it. And and those boys, even if they become very, very different, and somehow they all betray the community which they belong to, and they betray one another, because this is a story about uh, faithfulness and betrayals, very important betrayals that you can do as an adult. But this is as strong, those betrayals are simply as strong as the bond that was there when they were kids.
You already now answered one of my next questions, because I wanted to ask you something about Teresa and this extremely strong first love, but you already showed a few words about it. I'd again like to invite our participants that if they want to ask you something, that they can write their question in the section question and answers. They can also write it in Slovenian and I'll translate it later. I would now go to one of the boys, to Bern, which is in a way the main male protagonist. He is, as you mentioned, Cesare's nephew, and has almost no contact with his biological parents. And at times, at least to me, he seemed larger than life. He's charismatic, he's attractive, he's intelligent. But I found that he is repeatedly abandoned by the most important women in his life, and that he has this ambivalent attitude towards father figures, first towards Cesare, and then, let's say, symbolically speaking, towards God. What would you say? What has Byrne been looking for in life?
Well, that's exactly the question in the center of the book, and a question that somehow remains unanswered, I guess, because it cannot really be answered. You know, Berne was born before the book was born. It was really the starting point of everything about this story. It was there, he was there even before the place, even before the idea of the community. And I've had this image of him throughout, the image of a black hole. You know that black holes stand like in the middle of the galaxies, for instance. Like in the middle of our galaxies, there is probably a black hole, which is very massive and very important, and all the matter, the visible matter, rotates around this black hole. And Berne in this story is this black hole. He cannot be fully understood because there is a mystery about him and about his search in life. What is he looking for, and why, especially why he has this uh, hunger that never stops and that can never be filled. And all the other characters somehow find themselves in his gravitational field and start to rotate around him very fast. And what happens to most of them is that Berne, like a black hole, eventually swallows them. He eats them up, and that's also why the book in the original title is called Divorare il cielo, like devouring the sky. This idea of it trying to grasp and eat something that is so abstract that you cannot even touch it. And I I have a feeling that this all comes from the fact that Bern is, as you mentioned, a sort of orphan. I mean, his parents are alive, but he's been left like an orphan. And there is something about orphans that has always fascinated me very much. It's, I would say, a contradiction that I feel in many orphans. On the one hand, this constant need of being loved, of uh, of seeing the love that you were lacking um, be given to you somehow, to get back the love that you were uh, that was taken away from you very early. But on the other hand, um, there is this strength, the idea that an orphan knows he can do it on his own. So I can be enough for myself. I can make it on my own. And Berne has exactly these two sides. He can be very, very strong. He's like a natural born leader. And on the other hand, he's constantly testing the love of the people around him. And in this tension, he ends up uh, doing harm to the people he loves, and he ends up losing them. Sorry. So he always repeats the same pattern, which you probably felt during the novel. It just changes the subject of the search and the person, but it acts the same and destroys everything in the end. So I was very, yeah, that was the idea I was into, and somehow it reminded me of similar to who I was when I was a teenager, especially. I used to, no, I fell in love with people very easily, intellectually, sentimentally, in whatever way. And somehow I wanted to swallow those people entirely. And then when I did, I somehow had to leave them and move on to someone else. And I knew that, and it made me feel very guilty somehow. It was the thing I needed to grow up and to not feel that lonely. But I knew there was something, I don't know, there was something very violent in that. And somehow I put it in the story of Bern many years after that.
It's such a beautiful answer, you know, and I'm tempted to understand it in the light that is close to me. This is the Jungian perspective, which links together this image of this whole and the sky and so on, and what happens at the end with Bern. But of course, we shall not reveal that. And I'd just like to comment that we have one question related to Bern from our participants, which I'll keep for the end too. But you also kind of suggested the next question. By answering my question, you also told something about your past. You said, I used to be like that when I was a teenager. And when you're writing a novel, I do have the feeling that you do not only study the topic like a journalist, but also that you study the topic psychologically, or am I wrong? Or does this knowledge of human psyche comes from your own past?
I would say it comes from, I mean, I really believe that writers, certain kinds of writers, like I am, so let's say writers who write stories which are basically about human beings and feelings and interactions, I do believe that they need to be even more skillful than non-psychologists, but then psychology itself, without studying it, so that the way in which literature approaches the human soul has to be somehow more complete, probably, because it can be very specific, but on the other hand, it always respects the mystery that a human soul is, that cannot be categorized anyway, that can only be, you can only get close to it, but you will never get to know it completely. So I tend to see most of it from, I used to observe a lot when I was very, very young. I come from well, everybody comes from a complicated family. I come from a discreetly complicated family. And I was the youngest in the family. So my role was from the very beginning the watcher's role, the observer. That's probably why I became first a scientist and then a writer, because what I do best in life is to observe rather than act and participate. And I think that's when I learned things. But I have to be honest, I've also studied. I read a lot about. I mean, many of the books that you see behind me, there, I mean, a couple of shelves are just devoted to psychology, and especially I've studied and read a lot of Jung. I'm interested into it, but I wouldn't say you can learn to portray character psychologically by studying psychology. You can only add names to things that you had to know before?
It's half past 6 now, but I'll take the freedom to ask you another question related to the novel and then move to the essay, because I think we can perhaps go a little bit extra over those 45 minutes. Is that okay?
I'm sorry, it's me that I'm always very slow in the answers. I'm very long.
No, they're beautiful answers. It's really pity you're not here and we could have this talk live,
Yeah.
you know.
But we will.
Okay. And we also return to what you read at the very end, because this is one of the questions by the participants. So my last question related to the novel, because I would like to dedicate at least one of the questions to Teresa. And I don't know if this is a bit far-fetched question, because it's related also to the situation in Italy. But I somehow also read in Teresa this split, I would say this Italian split between the industrial, prosperous north and this rural and sunny south. Could it be read like that too? Because neither Teresa nor her family cannot establish a functioning link between these two parts of them.
Yeah, it's the book is, there are many opposites in the book, and one of them is for sure north and south of Italy, which are, as you were mentioning, so different, not just in the landscape, but in, I would say, in everything. And it's quite, I mean, Torino, the city I grew up in, which is, as you said, an industrial city, the city of cars, is highly populated by people who came from the south to work there. And so this movement that happens, especially in the summer, of people who go back to their families in the south is something that, I mean, it's very common, and I've always lived with. And curiously, most of the people I've been hanging out with when I was 20 are people whose families were from Puglia. So there was a whole community from Puglia. So that there's this mixture. And I think I was intrigued by this idea now that there are places you go to when you're a kid or a teenager in the summer, like family places, your grandma's house, like in Teresa's case. And maybe you spend summer, you spend time there, and you have cousins, you have friends, and you spend a very significant part of the year with them. Important bonds happen, love, the first loves, first sex, many things happen during those summers. And then you go back to your normal life in the north with under a very different sky. And when you go back again after 1 year, you always have that mix of excitement and tension, because you're afraid that you're going to meet people who have changed in the meantime, and you may not be able to recognize them, or they may not be interested by you anymore. And I think that's a very moving situation that all of us know to some extent. And so this movement of going back and forth from the original, from the city in which Teresa grows up, and these places that she chooses to be the place of her love and of her adult life, seem to me very, I don't know, very interesting, because you constantly look like a different version of yourself. You switch between two different versions of yourself.
Thank you, Jordana. I'd just like to ask you, is it okay to you if we end up at 7?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, great, because I would have now some questions related to the essay, and we do have some questions from our participants, and we're really happy because Slovenes tend to be very
I'll
shy
try to be
usually.
shorter, so
No,
to make it easier for you.
No, it's great. We started with nature, and in this incredible essay, How Contagion Works, at the end you explain the link between the pandemics, the current pandemics, and the nature. And you also point out that we may expect similar outbreaks in the future because of what we are doing to nature. Could you explain a bit this to our listeners, to those who haven't read it? But I would do strongly recommend them to read it.
Well, of course, it's not my imagination, or it's not my guess. It's just something that scientists have been saying for decades. I mean, we keep on repeating that this pandemic, this situation caught us by surprise, completely by surprise. We were unprepared because it caught us completely by surprise. But this is partly true, and partly it's an excuse for how unprepared we were, because the warnings have been there for many years. And according to scientists, it was not a matter of if a pandemic would happen, but only when and what kind of pandemic and how bad it would get. And then it happened. I mean, we also had anticipations of it. I mean, Ebola in 2014, the outbreak of Ebola in 2014 could have been a very bad one for all of us. It was contained, but it could have been much worse than what it was. And SARS in 2003, which was kind of similar to this one, could have ended up very differently. So we had the science, we had the knowledge somehow. We simply weren't listening to scientists and to the warnings, which is exactly what we are doing at so many levels. If you think of climate change, I mean, all the amazing protests of the younger generation is just the last of alarm calls of many that have been going on for years. And again, it's not a matter of if something is happening, it's just how bad we want it to become. So that's just a way to say that I was able to write that book very fast at the beginning of this, simply because I had read a lot of science and nonfiction about these subjects, which have always interested me so much. And what you realize if you start to listen to the scientists is that this is not out of nowhere. I mean, there is always an origin to these new pathogens that eventually get to the humans and adapt to the human population and start to spread. And that origin mostly comes from a twisted relationship between the humankind and the environment in which we live in. So we are too many, we are too invasive, we come into close contacts with habitats which were isolated and probably should stay isolated, where viruses and new bacteria and funguses and whatever you can think of exist, and they're not made to get in touch with us, but if they do, they're going to adapt to us. And there are tons of other problems related, like intensive farming is a way to make pathogens more, make that spillover, that jump between the human species and the humankind more likely to happen. So climate change in itself is a possible source of threat for future pandemics. So there are so many sources, and they all are connected to our behavior as a human species. And when I realized what was happening, I said, okay, we're entering a very dark time, a very sad time, because it was clear that many people would die. I just hope less than we're actually seeing. But I also said to myself, okay, this is the moment in which people might be listening a little more to all these connections. Because as long as these connections are not clear to most of the population, there won't be a real effort to tackle them. And I said, okay, so we need to get through this, but at the same time, we need to make this moment a useful moment for the future, to take the best out of it and try to show that this is not by chance, but that there are things that we need to learn about our behavior. Sorry, I made it very long. It's just difficult to explain it in English.
No, and it's just, again, I'd like to say to our participants, do read the essay, Ceasul Epidemiei, How Contagion Works, because it's so beautifully put there, you know, so clear, so short, so precise. I'll switch now to the questions by our participants, even if I'd have so many more questions for you. I'd just like to say to our participants, please do not raise your hands, but write your questions into the questions and answers section, and then we will choose some, not all, but some I will choose, or we will. Our first question, Giordano, goes back to Bern, and it reads like this. My question refers to the character of Bern, a pure idealist who loses battle after battle in the novel. Do you see his idealism as something people should follow, making a world a better place? Or are you also critical of him, of his naivete? You partly already answered it, but let's go back to it.
Well, I would say that I'm mostly critical because I don't like ideologies very much. I don't like them in general, any kind of ideology. I don't like strict ideas. And somehow Bern is constantly sucked into new ideologies and dogmas. It's funny because I mostly agree with everything he believes. So I think his efforts are in the right direction. We were talking about nature and protecting nature, but also when it comes to you know, taking care of other people like he does, but he doesn't recognize the moment in which these good attitudes become extreme, in which they become ideology. And that is always very dangerous because that's exactly the line. And when you cross that line, a good intention becomes something very dangerous and even harmful for other people. So I would say I'm with him and against him at the same time.
And the next question, thank you, goes back to when you talked about the golden cage. And the question reads, do you think that stories and books can also create some kind of golden prison that real life experience and real people cannot compete with?
That's I hope not. But I mean, being a writer, I know very well that this job is not simply a job, but it's a cage in itself. It's a protective cage in itself. I mean, I spend most of my time in fictional worlds and in describing experiences or reflecting upon experiences. And I know very well that this is also a way to keep me safe from, I mean, making those experiences. So, but I may be a little extreme in this, but I mean, I'm almost 40, and if I look back, I of course see the key moments of my life, but I see that there is an entire other life by now that is a life that I live through books and movies and music and whatever art I experienced. And I cannot say that it's more important or less important, but it's another life, and it's meaningful. So I tend to see it just as an expansion of the experiences that we can have. Yes.
Thank you. And the next question relates to you and to your life. It goes like this. I read in your column in Financial Times that you baked a lot in the quarantine. You wrote, quote, I just need to be able to control something, anything, while the structure of space and time seems to have escaped my comprehension, end of quote. Do you still bake?
Yes. Yes, I do. Oh, you're muted, Brenda.
No, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And another question is by one of your readers, female or male, I don't know, who adores your books and would like to know whether is it possible to get them signed by you in any place in Italy or on any Italian or other website. Or perhaps this is also a question for Slovene publisher.
Yeah, not that I know right now. I mean, for that, I think we're gonna have to wait until we can meet in person. Also, because I think I mean, the best thing about a signed book, and I've had books signed by authors who I love, is that you can relate it to the moment in which it actually happened and in which you had at least a brief contact.
So we hope then to see you soon in Slovenia. I remember your visit from 2013 when you were in Ljubljana and in our Koper Capodistria, and I hope to see you again.
And we're close. I mean, I often come to Trieste. I often go to Trieste, which is so close. So it will
so we
happen.
Great. So we have a few more minutes, and I'd like to ask you first an easy one, hopefully. How is life in Rome now? Because while the first lockdown happened, we have a very great TV correspondent, Janko Petrovec, who is stationed in Rome. He wrote a lot about how was life in Rome at that time. He even published a book later on. So in a way, we could follow Rome and Italy through his words. But I want to ask you, how is life in Rome now?
It's fairly normal on the outside. We still have a curfew. All Italy has a curfew, 10 p.m. Restaurants and bars are closed right now. They might be able to open again next week, but it's not clear yet. So I would say it's as normal as it can get in this situation. Probably even a little more normal than it should be, which is something that we might pay in the following months. But I don't know, I've been so energetic during the first months of the pandemic. I reacted with a lot of energy. I wrote the book and I did dozens of interviews and conversations like this, and published a lot of articles and so on and so forth. And now in the last weeks, I start to feel a little sort of fatigue about these days that are all similar to one another. I mean, I'm stuck here as everybody else, but the problem is basically that the days are very similar, one to the next and to the next and to the next. So we're trying to adjust to this as everybody. But tell me how it is in Slovenia right now, because you had very different moments and experiments also.
Well, I don't think it's much different, but I don't want to go more in detail, because other participants must not agree. But I would say that the same is happening here as everywhere. It's hard to know to what point to trust the government and to what point not, and to what point to trust the science and to what point not. And this would be actually my last question, because I don't want to make this talk political.
Well, every talk tends to be political right now. It's very difficult to escape.
Oh, but they just reminded me, our publisher, the Slovene publisher, one more question, which I promised to tell it before. Asking out of curiosity for the end of the talk, what do you read for pleasure?
Well, it really changes with time. When I'm writing a novel, I have a hard time reading just one thing, so I usually read like 10 things together and finish none of them. But I read a lot of nonfiction and a lot of fiction as well. And at the moment, I'm reading an Italian author whom I love very much. He's called Tondelli. He died years ago, but he's a wonderful writer. And I don't know, it's become very, very difficult to distinguish between reading for pleasure and just reading for work and just reading. But I consider myself very, very lucky because I have a chance to read a lot, and I still am a reader before a writer, and I want to remain that.
But we can expect the next novel, because this is actually one of the questions. It goes like, after writing the last word of the novel, did you felt relaxed, satisfied, and confident, or did you felt empty and more stressed about the outside world? Do you think you have some stuff left inside you to be written in the future?
I hope so, because I hope I still have a few years and a few books ahead of me. But it's a real question, because every time you finish something, you feel like you emptied yourself out completely. And if it's not the case, it's probably means that you've done something wrong, or you've not done it completely. But I finished Heaven and Earth now more than 3 years ago. It's not a long time, but it's quite enough to start to think of something else, and I'm trying to. And it's probably one of the best moments in which, there is this complete possibility of anything happening, of the book becoming anything. You don't. It's also very scary. It's a very scary moment of the writing, but it's okay. As long as I'm strong enough to face it, I will do it, and then I will stop.
So my very last question, and then we have to end. At the beginning, we talked about utopias. You're both a writer and a scientist. I'd like to ask you for a utopia of how could our life after the end of pandemic look like? What would be, ideally, what could we learn from it? That's why a utopia.
Are you asking the scientist or the writer or the human being at 6 p.m.?
I'll let you to choose how to answer it from which part of yourself.
One of the key things of the essay was that, we're all longing for our normality, whatever it was, whatever it's called, but at the same time, it would be very disappointed if everything went back to the same as it was before. It would be disappointing and would be unrespectful toward all the people who died, and it would be a missed chance, probably, because this is also a moment of big transformation. So I'm not really looking forward to an afterworld to remove this immediately. I plan to stay in this as long as it's needed, probably, and try to understand it and I don't know. I'm not really imagining what it would be from a year from now. I'm in that sense. I'm living in the moment, which is very strange for me. I'm not used to that. I'm a planner usually. I schedule everything, and now this is forcing me to be in the water, just swimming, floating.
Thank you. I'd really like to thank you for your sincere and heartfelt words, and also for your inner world.
Thanks.
I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that our listeners too. And I really hope that time and circumstances will allow us to meet soon in Slovenia.
They will. I'm pretty sure of it.
And in the meantime, I would like to wish you well to you, all the best to you and your family. And please do continue to write, whether fiction or whether half scientific, half literary essays, because it's really nice to read your works. So thank you.
Thank you, Breda. Thank you. And thanks to everybody who's there, although we don't see them.
Ja. Hvala tudi vsem, ki ste bili z nami. Upam, da ste ostali z nami do konca. Tale pogovor bo preveden v slovenščino in bo 2. februarja objavljen na kanalu YouTube Mladinske knjige. Berite še naprej in predvsem kupujte knjige. Hvala, srečno. Thank you and good night to everyone. Grazie Giordano.
Ciao.
Mille grazie.
Grazie.
Buonasera.
Bye bye. Ciao.
Bye bye.